starting to write you start to write your own op-ed. And I really want to emphasize how important this is in really beginning your career as a subject matter expert. Right. So you have a lot of expertise already. You are making a name for yourself. You really want to start making this impact. And so that's why we really are encouraging you and making even your homework to actually submit an op-ed. Um, so Kate and I, we just published something. I don't know if you I saw it was in the Daily News. We actually wrote about this program, and I can tell you, going into it, I had very specific goals in mind for writing that article. So first, I wanted to bring obviously attention to the McCall McBain program for a number of reasons, so that more people on campus know about it, so we get even more highly qualified people. I wanted to shine a bright light on an amazing initiative that's happening in my department, my faculty, my university. And at sort of a wider level, we also want to raise awareness that it's important to invest in postdoc training. And this is something that is still an underdeveloped area in academia. And we have ambitious plans in our program to expand the influence that we're doing. So, so Annie, actually, I don't know if you know, she's actually a postdoc from Waterloo, and she's part of our initial plans to start inviting applicants from local universities, right? And then we have a broader plan beyond that of raising national awareness. So Katie is actually going to be presenting in November at the postdoc. What's it?
There's two conferences. So there's the postdoc association as well as the graduate and postdoctoral network. So they're both hosting in Victoria. Yeah, go to Victoria, which is kind of boring.
So we want to raise awareness at a national level and even help to develop resources, sort of like at a national level. And we've got kind of grander plans there. So all of that is actually tied in to the goals that we had with publishing this article. And I'm going to pass you over to Wade, and Wade can talk to you about goals that you'll have for publishing your op-ed.
Thanks so much, Joe. Hello again, everybody. Before we begin, I have a presentation here that's probably going to last about an hour. We'll have go around the table and talk about what ideas you might have for your own op-eds and see where we can find the narrative thread inside the information that you're presenting. But as we go along, I want you to treat this very casually. If there's a question that you might have or a point you'd like to know more about, please interrupt me. As a reporter, that's what I used to do for 25 years. When I didn't get something, and there's no point in hearing something unless you're going to understand it. And I want you to understand it in a way that's useful to you. Okay. So we'll talk about today about what is an op-ed, why is it a good idea to write one, how do you go about doing it, how do you go about getting it published. So start with what is an op-ed. It's such an odd kind of a hyphenated word. But generally speaking, it's something simple. It's an analytical or explanatory article published in a newspaper, magazine, or on website, typically contributed by a non-journalist who has experience or expertise in the topic at hand. The point is to provide greater insight into a subject, usually one that happens to be in the news at around the same time. And that's a stretchy definition. The authors of such articles are typically not paid for writing them, but offer them as a public service. And there is a value that accrues to the author and the author's institution. We'll get to that as well. Op-ed is an often misunderstood term. Most people think it means opinions and editorials. The term is actually just a contraction for opposite the editorial page. When we think about the layout of the physical newspaper, which is becoming less and less common, I'm sorry to say, but still, that's where the origin of the word is. You would open to the editorial page where you would see the cartoon, the newspaper's editorial, which is really just the newspaper's op-ed about something that's happening that day, expressing its owner's point of view. Letters to the editor would be there, and on the other page, you'd see a bunch of columns. Some of them are by staff writers, and some of them are by community writers. Those are the op-eds that we're hoping that you will be writing and placing, and I'll help you to get that done. Part of the work we do in my office, communications, marketing, and public affairs, is to maintain and enhance the reputation of McMaster. An important aspect of that work is making sure that the public is aware of the university's research and expertise and how that matters to society. The field of journalism is in transition and resources have diminished severely. My wife just lost her job last week after 27 years of being an editor of the paper. We're expecting it. It's not a tragedy, but it's just these endless waves of change and tumult that are reshaping the whole industry. So there's nowadays, because there are fewer journalists, there's less specialized reporting on education, science, and research, which makes it more challenging for McMaster to maintain and grow its share of coverage. You think about how many science reporters there used to be in Canada. Every truly major daily newspaper had a science reporter, had an education reporter, had often a medical reporter. Those specializations are disappearing. There are very few dedicated science reporters left in Canada. You talked about hearing Carl Zimmer. He's coming to campus again next week. We're going to be having lunch with him, as a matter of fact. But his is a dying breed, unfortunately. One solution to the problem of diminishing journalistic outlets, in the number of outlets and the size of those outlets is both in decline, is to use the strategic lever of op-eds by our faculty members, senior leaders, and graduate students. Publishing an op-ed allows an author or authors to explain facts and context entirely in their own words and reach a potentially wide audience with them. Much of the work we do in my office, perhaps even most, is trying to get our experts and our researchers placed in the news. When somebody does a research paper that we know has news value, we're pitching out the results of that research in the hope that reporters will want to interview our people and do stories about the research outcomes. Similarly, if an event happens in the world, such as an earthquake, an epidemic, a war, an economic event, we know who our roster of experts is. We generally do. And we think, well, she could talk about that. Let's see if she's available. And then if we confirm that, then we're contacting journalists and saying, hey, if you need somebody today on the earthquake, you can talk to her about this, and this is what she'll say. And we give a little sample of, then they interview them, and then it achieves the same ends. It helps people to see, wow, McMaster, important things are happening at McMaster. That's where, big thinkers are working and learning and teaching. That's a place that I can believe in, where I think they're spending my tax dollars well, that I might want to invest in, where I might want to work or study. And it happened more even than I realized it did before I got here. And it's kind of cool. It's inspiring. We get lots of nice stories about the impact, sometimes the unexpected impacts that result from being in the news. For the author of an op-ed, writing one can bring recognition for herself or himself, the department, university, and that recognition can have benefits, including, as I said, greater awareness among public and private funders, better access to opportunities for commercializing research, and developing employment opportunities. For the university, they reinforce that McMaster is a center of thoughtful leadership on important issues, and that can help attract funding, faculty and students, and to demonstrate the value the university provides to the public, as I said. Now, what I do and how I can help you is this: we're not the only university that's trying to get our people into the op-ed pages and onto websites that publish op-ed pieces. So competition is fierce and growing more challenging. And of course, they don't only come from universities either. The Globe and Mail, for example, takes something like 1 in 50 submissions. And the numbers are similar for the Toronto Star and the National Post and other large newspapers. I don't say this to discourage you at all. It just means that you might need some help, which is where I come in. Over the past several years, our primary target has become something called the Conversation Canada. which is an online publication that publishes only op-eds, several each day. The Conversation Canada is a nonprofit academic journalistic partnership that publishes pieces only by academic authors, which have been curated and edited by skilled journalists. We work with them very closely. You may never have heard of it before. Joe and Katie asked you to take a look at it, but the Conversation Canada is increasingly influential unto itself. And in a way, it also makes its content available to other media outlets at no cost. Because its work has already passed through a layer of professional editors, conversation content often gets taken up by outlets such as the National Post, Slate, Salon, Maclean's. We've had a piece in the Washington Post before. The Conversation was founded in Australia in 2011. Today has outlets in 9 countries or continents. Besides Australia and Canada, they include the UK, US, Africa, France, Indonesia, New Zealand, and Spain. And sometimes they're trading content among themselves. So a story that you write here that lands in the Conversation will be published there, and their page, if you've been there, is beautiful, it's well presented, their work is well edited. It comes with hyperlinks that the reader can use to find more information or to find the supporting evidence behind the arguments that are being presented in those pieces. And as I said, it makes that content available to any other media outlet that may wish to take it up using Creative Commons, as long as they don't change it. So that's great, because the Conversation itself has millions of eyeballs on it every month, but then every one is like a lottery ticket. That it could end up in many other outlets besides the Conversation Canada's homepage. McMaster became a founding partner of the Conversation Canada when it came on stream in 2017, and frequently publishes pieces from our faculty members and graduate students, typically 1 or 2 each week. McMaster placed first among Canadian universities for total readership in 2020 and 2021, with 3 million reads. In 22, we came second to the University of Toronto, 3 times the size of McMaster, but we used to be number 1, and now we're number 2. In fact, we had been leading through all of 2022 until a U of T author named Donald Weaver published what I have to say was an excellent piece on a new theory about the cause of Alzheimer's, which netted 1 million readers in just 1 week. That piece was republished earlier this year and scored another 500,000 reads on its own, and that's helped U of T to stay in the lead to this point this year. We're going to fix that, right? Overall readership of the Conversation leapt by about 30% during the pandemic, when authors were at home and had more time to write, and when audiences were clamoring for information about the social, medical, and other consequences of COVID. Since then, it has subsided a little, but the Conversation remains at the heart of our op-ed efforts. And so far in 2023, we are sitting in second place among the U15 group of Canada's major research universities, after U of T, just ahead of UBC. So we're punching above our weight. We make a lot of specific efforts in this regard, and I want us to be back in the number 1 slot. For the first time, an article by a McCall McBain Research Fellow is McMaster's leading conversation article of the year. That's Andrew Thompson's A Fishy Problem, How Antidepressants May Impact the Health of Our Aquatic Ecosystems. He was one of the people whose pitch we watched while we were eating our lunch. I told him we'd come back to him. While Gao Lang Fang's piece, explaining the different types of electric engines, is in 4th spot for the year to date. So that's pretty good. Like, for people who haven't done this before, who are doing it for the first time, to be writing the number 1 piece and the number 4 piece out of all McMaster pieces so far this year.
Idea on the numbers.
It's in the tens of thousands of reads, but I can't remember exactly. But those are specific reads. The numbers of times people have clicked on them and read them. Remember, we were talking about readership, how we measure it. So when you publish with the Conversation, they know exactly how many individual people have read it. So their numbers are super meaningful. Both these projects started right here in last year's version of the session we're having right now. And the majority of the pieces we worked on last year, including one by Katie, and another by the chair of the psychology department who sat in last year, were published in The Conversation, in University Affairs in Katie's case, and in the Hamilton Spectator. I'm confident we can do at least as well again this year. This is the 5th year for me doing this. Before I came to McMaster nearly 13 years ago, I've been a newspaper reporter, editor, and columnist for 25 years. I've written a few books as well. And so I'm familiar with what papers want and continue to have good contacts in the industry. So that's why I think I can help you. My part of my title is editor, university commentary, and op-eds. And in that role, I can help you develop ideas and shape your work so it stands the best chance of being published in the most appropriate venue we can find. And as we were saying informally before lunch, if we try to place your piece someplace and they say no, it doesn't mean that it's over. We just keep trying until we find a home for it, and we usually do. And one should never take these things personally, although it's very difficult not to, especially if it's not your living to write articles and develop a thicker skin. If you've never tried before and someone says no, but I just want you to understand that I've seen great pieces rejected and then end up somewhere else and do really well.
They're used to it. They're
Mhm.
journal artists.
I often help McMaster's senior leaders, faculty members, and graduate students to get their work published and posted. I just finished a piece that I was ghostwriting for the head of family medicine yesterday. I interviewed the president for another one yesterday afternoon, and I'll be working on that later this week. I help them to shape ideas, act as a writing coach and editor, sometimes ghostwrite pieces directly, as I said, based on information from the authors. And they always, whenever I just draft something when I ghostwrite it for somebody, they still take a look at it. They may tinker with it. They might say, I wouldn't use that word, I use this word, or can we transpose these 2 paragraphs, things like that. And that's a good way of making sure that it remains authentic, that it is in their voice. So let's take a look at the practicalities of getting an op-ed from idea to publication. Job 1, getting published. The only effective op-ed is the one that people can read because it's been published in the paper or online. The larger the audience, the more impactful your piece will be, but larger outlets are also the choosiest, as I mentioned. So we have to what we have to do is remove every barrier to success and to make sure that our ideas get published. It's really about starting with 100% of all the people, knowing we're going to lose some of them along the way, but plugging every leak that we can to make sure we hold as many of them as we can. So to do this, we need to think like an editor, a busy editor. A friend and former colleague of mine who's now a managing editor at the Toronto Star receives as many as 1,000 emails a day.
Oh my God.
So you can imagine what that looks like. And that's not her only job, is answering email. That's only a part of the job. So many of those emails naturally don't even get opened or read before they're deleted. And the situation is similar across the field. So the funny thing about trying to hold everybody and not lose anyone, that battle begins with the subject line of your note. Of the pieces that do get a look, let's face it, most of them end up in the no pile. Some end up in the maybe pile, which is really just usually the waiting room for the no pile, because more pieces are coming in every day. You want to be on the smallest pile, the yes pile. The easier we can make an editor's job, the more successful we can be in getting onto that pile. This starts with being disciplined and self-critical in your writing. The major barriers to publication of op-eds are in order: length, timeliness, and style. These barriers exist because they are also the barriers to readership. Your piece is competing with others that want to be in the same space. And once it's there, it competes with everything else on the same page or on the same screen. And in turn, against everything else in life. Because reading anything is optional, unless it's for a school. Most pieces that are submitted are way too long. This is the easiest, sort of the low-hanging fruit of improving our chances. You need to stay to the length of the pieces you see in the outlet to which you are submitting. And usually that's posted somewhere or written or into the fine print at the bottom of the op-ed page. But that length is almost always between 650 and 800 words, with 7 to 750 being the optimal length. A piece that comes in far too long is likely to be taken as a sign the author has not paid enough attention. And that can lead to the piece being rejected without an editor even reading it, because that editor is going to be making judgments about how much time do we have? How much, if this isn't coming to the point right away and this is twice as long as it should be, I don't have time to finish it. But I can make a pretty educated guess that if the person wasn't even disciplined enough to write it at the right length, then it's going to be problematic in other ways. That means it's going to take work for the editors on the team to bang it into shape, to get it into the paper, time they don't have, and time that is becoming shorter, unfortunately, with every passing month. Now, timeliness is another key. Op-eds are important to news outlets because they help readers to understand issues while they are happening, not 2 weeks later. These days, that might be the war in Ukraine, healthcare, state of democracy, the economy, climate change, anything that's in the news. So if you see an issue in the news that you think you can write about, today is the day to start. Even if you have a piece in mind about something general, evergreen, as they sometimes call it, it's wise to frame it around an issue in the news today to make it seem fresh and necessary. That's the difference between the maybe pile and the yes pile. The maybe pile is like, well, that's not a bad piece. I don't have to run that tomorrow, though. It has shelf life. And so I'm going to put that aside for later. But it's rare that someone gets around to later to find it, rescue it, and publish. It happens sometimes, and it especially happens during the holidays when people are going to be, newsrooms are already at low staff. A lot of people have their winter break. There'd be 2 weeks when there's fewer staff and they like to get things in the can, as they say, ahead of time. And so an evergreen story that isn't going to be overtaken by events is a good safe bet to say we can run this on January 1st or December 29th when there are fewer people around to work. The style, another of the major considerations for what gets published, is a very broad category, I admit. It covers a lot of territory. All of it is vital. First, it means filing or submitting a piece that is clean, free from errors in spelling, grammar, and punctuation. And I don't mean to be insulting when I say this, but it's a baseline. It offers no room for compromise and forms a big part of an editor's impression of you and your work, how trustworthy it is, how much work it's going to take, how much care has gone into it. All of this is signaled by how clean your copy is. And sadly, that's where most of this, between length, timeliness, and style, that's how everything gets to the no pile, because you're being rejected on one or more of those fronts. Style means writing that is cogent, persuasive, compelling, and of interest to a wide audience. Ideally, it's provocative. Editors are always looking for what they call talking point or water cooler stories that will get people talking. The kind of thing where someone says, did you see that piece about this? Did you see this? Hey, here, I saved this for you. Or people will forward it to you in an email. Or you'll hear a radio talk show host saying, great piece in the Star this morning about XYZ, or terrible piece in the Star. Let's talk about it. As long as people are talking about it and you believe in what you wrote, that's all that really matters. The more that people are reading and talking about it, the better the outcome. It means writing a piece featuring a deliberate structure with arguments that are supported by evidence. It means writing in language and a voice that everyone can understand. We talked about this a little bit before, which is a challenge when, as a researcher, you're steeped in this subject every day, and it has its own language. Much of it is technical, and a big skill in trying to be successful in writing an op-ed piece or doing an interview about your work is finding that voice that is substantial enough that only an expert would have, but accessible enough so that other people will understand and be able to care about what you're saying and be able to relate to you. So, what was the word that you mentioned you might want to work out of your 90-second presentation? Physiological, I think.
Yeah.
No, that's a borderline word. Most people would know it, but some people, that might be a barrier. That might be the sort of the speed bump that stops somebody from going on, and it happens so easily. Now, I think you could make a whole science out of what stops people from finishing reading something. Why did they choose to read? If they had a menu of things, that is what a newspaper is or a website is, why do they choose the ones they do and reject the others they don't choose to read? And when they're reading, in the course of their reading, how distractible are they? What is it? What is the actual thing that makes them not finish? It might not even register in their conscious mind, but they just say and move on. When we all do it, I would say that most things we start reading, we don't actually finish reading. But what is that point? Is a source of fascination to me. My advice to you is read a number of pieces online and in newspapers, the kind of piece that you're thinking of writing, including the daily editorials, as I said, where newspapers present their own official corporate viewpoints about issues. Some of the best writers in the country are responsible for editorials, even though they're not signed. Typically, most newspapers, they don't have a byline at the bottom of their official editorial, but some of the best writing, even if you disagree with it, is to be found on the editorial page. Those are the jobs that journalists really want. I'm glad you have copies of it in front of you. I encourage you to read The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. Every writer should read it, and most writers have it on their shelf. And certainly an early mentor of mine told me to go out and buy this book, and I bought it for many, many other people over the course of my career. It's a kind of a Bible all writers should own and consult. Fun fact, one of the authors of this book, the White of Strunk and White, E.B. White, is the same person who wrote some of the great classics of children's literature, including Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little. All that book and those books are all excellent examples of crisp, well-crafted writing. Another piece of advice, when reading other people's work, make note of how the writer enters the story. What makes it move along, where it bogs down. If you have trouble finishing the piece, pinpoint the line where you lost interest and ask why. Developing a good instinct for what not to do is one of the most important skills a writer can acquire. Just as editors do, try to picture the everyday reader who comes across your piece online or in the paper and ask yourself if you can see someone reading it and calling someone else over to read it. If the answer is no, ask yourself why and fix the problem. You understand what I'm saying? Like, can you see somebody going, you had the imaginary reader, can you see them getting excited about reading your story and saying, this is something you should know too? That's the highest and best goal we can have, that we can attain. Make sure you're economical in presenting your ideas by combing out unnecessary words and ideas. An example is the word that, funny as it is, which, like the human appendix, can be cut out in almost every instance without harming the sentence. If I get a piece from somebody and it's over by 100 words, I say, well, the first thing I do is Apple F and search for the word that, and almost every one of them I can take out. And sometimes that gets me halfway there in shortening it. So it's a trick. It's an easy trick. It's very obvious. I wouldn't like too obvious to share with you, but it really is helpful in getting the word count down. Another tip, read your work out loud, as goofy as this sounds, to hear what your piece sounds like. This is what many reporters do before they file or submit their work. Though timeliness is essential, try to leave some kind of gap. I should say this also about reading your work out loud. Like, why is that important? You can hear things in your writing that you wouldn't necessarily see when you're looking at the page or at the screen. I don't know exactly why that is. I think it must be a different. Joe probably knows, but I think there's a different part of your brain that's processing or is processing differently. You look at it, might just be because you're familiar with what you've written, you've seen it on the screen, and you can't necessarily hear when there's a repeated word. That is if lots of words are repeated, but a rarely occurring word, if you use it twice, really tends to clang and stand out and seem like you weren't being very careful with what you were writing. But when you read it out loud, it helps you get to that place that's closer to it being like it had been written by somebody else. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to distance ourselves from our work so we can see it more clearly, more objectively, and see what's wrong with it and fix it before we give it to somebody else who's going to say this stinks. If we find out what stinks about it, we change it, then we're always working to plug those holes, to improve our chances of being published, to improve our chances of being read and understood, and having our ideas end up in other people's heads without us being in the room. That's the whole magic of all of this, is to have those ideas, make other people care about them, make other people understand, and enjoy we all take pleasure in what we do. We think that what we do is important. We're confident that what we do is important, but we want other people to share some of that magic that animates our day. So, hey, although timeliness is essential, my other piece of advice to you is to try to leave some kind of a gap between your draft and your final version, even if it's only 20 minutes. This is the same idea as reading it out loud, but another way of doing the same thing, of distancing yourself from your work so that you can see it as coldly, as objectively as is reasonably possible. So if you don't have very much time, and this often happens in life, we have to get something done. We don't have time to leave alone and come back to it the next day, even despite our best intentions. Even if you can do something else that's very different from this before you come back to it, that might be making a phone call or reading something online or getting up and going to the bathroom. When you come back, you'll be at least a little bit refreshed from whatever it was you're doing. You'll be a little bit more distant from the piece that you just wrote. And it's amazing that how even a small break can help to expose those weaker passages, those things that you need to fix in your article. So now we're at the final part, what we can do together. I know one of your assignments is to write an op-ed piece and get it published if you can. So I can help you to refine, develop, pitch, and place your pieces in good quality publications, as we have done with McCall McBain Fellows over the last 4 years before this. So now we can talk about how we can get that done. I'd like to hear your ideas and talk about them with our group, so you can all get a notion of how to shape your pieces and position them for success. As in my spare time, I do a lot of landscape painting and take a lot of classes and paint with other painters outdoors. And every one of those sessions ends up with a critique. So everyone lays out all of their pieces, and the teacher will come around, or whoever's leading the group that day, talk about what problems did that artist face? What problems did they overcome? And that person has learned in the process of doing it, but then we all learn from looking at that other person's work. We all learn something from everyone else, the way everyone else solves problems. So that's why, in that spirit, I want to hear what your ideas are and how we can, and to find the possible op-ed idea within them. But in my work, we're always trying to find what we call the narrative thread inside of something. Someone's talked about an abstract and how short an abstract is or long it is compared to the 90-second presentation. If we said a 90-second presentation should be 100 words or fewer, and you said an abstract is
115.
shows
this.
right. We in our office, if we're reading someone else's academic paper, thinking about, can we publicize this? If so, how big is this going to be? Is it going to be worth the effort that we put into it and that the faculty member or graduate student will need to put into helping us to do this? Will it all be worthwhile? We're always looking for, it's not even necessarily the actual research results that become the headline. It typically is, but it isn't always. Sometimes something else in there that is really going to capture the public's imagination. It becomes kind of the needle that pulls the thread. The thread is the research results. We always want to make sure we're depositing that information into people's imaginations, but to break into their imagination and to become the piece of information that they decide to consume and to get down far enough, we have to make it interesting. We have to make it enjoyable. It's a form of entertainment. It's a blend of entertainment and information. And when you like something that you're reading, I think you're more apt, A, to finish it, and B, to retain what you have read. So we have to find something in what you're doing that will engage lots of people. Why did that piece about antidepressants in wastewater and how they affect fish, why did that capture the imagination of the public and make that, so far this year, the most read piece by any McMaster? Does anybody have any idea about why that might be?
I mean, at first, this is really dumb, but it's like, I'm like, oh, really happy fish. Yay.
Yeah. Those gloomy fish will not, their lives will be better. Any other reasons why you think that might have been?
It's the same, but other way around. I was like, oh my God, after COVID pandemic, many people got depression. And this is why it's so important for us. And environment, so we know everybody's thinking about climate changing, global warming. Well, fishes are also part of the environment which is changing.
Yeah.
So that was my idea. Also, it was very beautifully formatted. I really love the photo of the fishes.
For me, it's the fact that, oh, am I going to get the antidepressants in my fish because I am a very heavy consumer of fish.
Right,
so
right.
I'm like, oh, what?
Right.
Does it mean that
Am I eating
even though I'm
somebody's
not
old drugs?
depressed,
Yeah.
I'm taking somebody's
Yeah.
drugs?
That's a
You're
good point,
saving
yeah.
some money though.
Yeah.
But I think there are elements of what all of you have said contributed to why that piece was successful. Depression is a very common issue. And if, many people feel depressed or suffer from depression or know somebody who is. Many people take antidepressants. So it's the size of the group that might be interested, even for selfish reasons, is large. And then we've also got the idea of who consumes fish. What about how are human activities harming nature or improving nature if the fish are feeling better? But how are our activities affecting nature? And there's also just sort of the novelty of it all that, you don't really think about whether the prescription you're taking might have literal downstream effects, but when you pass waste, whatever you've consumed is part of that waste, and it ends up in the food chain in one way or another, or even just in the actual environment. That's what they're breathing as year-old drugs, and that's kind of a novel idea.
Would you say it also kind of slots into a pre-existing kind of conflict, like a social conflict, because you have kind of this environmental aspect and environmentalism aspect, right? And so, the point about waste getting into and affecting ecosystems, that goes back to Rachel Carson. That goes back to this kind of long-standing, broadly contoured conflict. And so there's also that aspect of it doesn't matter if people are happy or upset about it. It's like people have thoughts about whether what we as people are doing to the planet is bad or good.
Yeah,
And it kind of fits into that conflict as well.
Okay, yeah.
So plenty of people can talk about it at the water cooler.
right, and right, can you see somebody saying, did you read that crazy story this morning? Did you know that antidepressants that end up in our pee or ending up in fish and like they affect their lives and their behavior? You know, and you're kidding me. No, that's the kind of thing you want to have happen. Like that's because they're thinking about your idea, right? They're talking about it.
So wait, I guess you have to also, so sometimes postdocs, their concerns like, who would be interested in my research or what
Mhm.
I'm doing? Like, it's hard for me to think of a way to make the public interested
Yeah,
in my research. And I can't remember if that was the case for Andrew as well, but it's a pleasant surprise that it became one of the top read stories.
yeah,
But I think a lot of people, maybe you're sitting there thinking right now, like I don't do mental health or or like climate change, which are like automatic, like, oh, everyone's gonna be interested in that. So it could be a challenge, I guess, to think of the angle for which you can get people interested. And like I don't think that the topic of that article is his main focus of his research exclusively, but I thought it was a great angle in to get people interested in his area of research.
and just before you arrived, I think we were talking about Gao Lang's piece from last
Yeah.
year about hybrid cars. That's not the main area of his research either. You know, you heard his 90-second presentation. It's about efficiency and creating components for electric and electronic devices that can be more efficient and make them and be allow them to be manufactured as more cheaply, but without compromising quality. But in the conversation like the one we're going to have, he talked about everybody, all of his friends asking him, what kind of car should I buy? How will I know? And he said, it's not really about the brand of car, it's about what's inside. And we're all familiar with driving different variations of internal combustion engines, but few of us are familiar with the components of a hybrid or electric vehicle and what actually makes it run. And his piece was sometimes these pieces are merely explanatory. Like what's up with earthquakes or like what does it mean? Are these plates going underneath? Are they colliding? Are they, or and almost any subject that comes up in the news. An explainer is a very valuable thing. The conversation loves them. They don't always have to be a straight up narrative. Sometimes they can be a list of points. And when we get to working on your individual pieces, I'll try to give you some good guidance on how we can find the most relatable, useful, and likely story to be published. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. So, how, what advice do you have for someone like me? So I'm a historian.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about negotiating, writing something entertaining and interesting with, making sure the facts are still there. And what I mean by that, sometimes historians who do public facing work or sometimes I think actually unfairly criticized for playing loose with the facts. Because sometimes I do need to take creative liberties in telling a story that might compromise the historical fact that actually happened that I don't have time to talk about. So how do you suggest someone like me wanting to tell a story, wanting to be creative and playful, but with the word count, I might have to compromise some historical data that is very complex. And and honestly, I don't like the academics who say, "Oh, well, that op-ed, that historian, he's not being technically historically accurate." And I think I think that there is a lot. I think that there's a time and place. I think that journalists are honestly the best writers. I think academics, to be totally honest, in this room are not great writers. In general, they do not follow strong and white. They're verbose and obscure and So I don't know if I'm making sense, but I
Yeah,
want to
you're completely making sense.
I want to be entertaining, but
Yeah.
also I want to stay true to history.
I mean, there's some universal questions in there, that everyone has a subject that he or she knows very well. And you are cautious, understandably and admirably, about creating misunderstanding when you're trying to enhance understanding of something. You're cautious about seeming overly simple in your writing. And oftentimes in my work, a barrier that we have to overcome is people who are worried more about what their colleagues will say about reading something than the number of people who will read it who are not academic people who have a chance. Really, you're giving them a chance to understand something new and that they didn't know before, that as an expert, but you don't have to present in a way that is going to be a new piece of academic information necessarily, but will be sound. Your reputation is your reputation, and it has to be. So what you say needs to be accurate enough to withstand some scrutiny, but it also needs to be accessible enough in this forum for people to want to read it, people to be able to understand it, and take something away from it. And it's a huge problem I have with the history faculty members I try to work with, and I'm a graduate of the history program here myself, is that sometimes a very small academic point that is under debate, people are afraid, like, oh, I can't. I remember trying to have someone write a story about Vimy Ridge when we were coming up to the anniversary of this battle that was very influential in the First World War in Canadian history, but has widely been misinterpreted, misunderstood. And it all kind of dissolved into people don't understand this. I can't make people reshape it. There's this myth. I can't deal with this myth. And it was very frustrating. But there's, I guess I would encourage you to kind of take off some of these, this ballast that comes with, that can come with studying at a high level, something no, everyone participates in history. If we're alive, we're participating in what will soon be history. And it's part of everyone's lives. We can all relate to it, but it becomes less relatable the higher up you go, perhaps. And really, your job is just to bring clarity and understanding and feed the curiosity of people who want to know more and kind of forget about those other people, if it's possible, even to forget sometimes about our own predispositions to writing for other academic audiences or for at the book level as opposed to the everyday level. It's a funny thing, but to write something simply is often more difficult than to write something longer and more technical. There's a famous saying, and I think it's from Mark, or a famous line from a letter. I think it's from Mark Twain, where he said, "I'm sorry for writing such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one," because it's harder to write short, as we were talking about earlier, about presenting your bio in your elevator pitch in 90 seconds. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
it does. I think that's what's frustrating about academics who try to push back against public facing work is that they think it's easy. And it's not. It's
There's actually a bit of jealousy.
Oh,
sometimes.
yes,
I think like
absolutely.
when someone's getting attention for helping to popularize
yeah.
your field, political,
Yeah.
and they're trying to pull back a little bit. But so I think that's also a force that you're working against a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question. Since the way you are explaining how to write is in a simple way, so meaning there is no guideline how to.
And the funny thing is, it's a story, and so a story can take many different shapes and forms. And if there were a guideline that could say, step A, step B, C, D, E, F, G, they would all come out the same. What I would encourage you to do is to use your natural voice I would encourage all of you to really spend a lot of time on the opening to your story. You know, and journalists call this the lead paragraph or something. Many reporters spend half their total writing time on the first paragraph because it's what's going to set the stage for all the rest. It's where the reader is going to decide, is this something I want to finish or not? And it should also hook them and intrigue them, pull them in, make them want to know more. Like, where is she going with this? You know, have you ever thought about eating a moth? And then someone will, what? And then you say, well, you know, a trout eats 100 moths a month, and this is how they live. You know, whatever your field is. There are ways to pull people in, and once you've developed that opening, the rest should flow kind of naturally. You should be always thinking about, you're looking at your word count, thinking where you are ahead of time. You should be thinking things like, what's my main message here? My main message is this. What's the way how am I gonna get at that message? It doesn't have to be the thing you open with. And compared to, say, a news article, the writing is different. In a news article, they call that the inverted pyramid style, where the most important information is all at the opening, and then the rest of the story is kind of a cascade of lesser details from most to least important. Why? In case someone stops reading, they'll still have, from reading the first few paragraphs, most of the idea of it. And also, because the news is always changing and the priorities of stories might shift right at the time of publication, sometimes they have to be cut very quickly. So reporters always assign, or editors assign reporters to write stories to a certain inch count. That means if the whole story was like in one long column, most stories are like 3-4 columns wide, but they talk about column inches of a story. So they'll say, give me a 15-inch story on X. You go back and write that story. That's usually about 600 words. However, by the time publication comes around, there might be a huge conflagration, and that story has to be cut to a 6-inch story. Well, they can cut it on the stone. In other words, they can, without even looking at it, they can just trim off the bottom of it, and it will still make sense because you've written in inverted pyramid style. But in an op-ed piece, it's not going to get cut that way. You have a chance to spin a tale. And unless it's the explanatory kind that I was talking about that might come in bullet form, you have a chance to bring people in. It's a limited chance. Like you have, like I said, 700, 750 words. In that space, though, you want to call them in, keep them in, share information, drive them toward a conclusion. And an actionable conclusion is always best, but it isn't necessary. So in that middle part is soft, which is both frustrating because I can't say, here's your formula for writing the middle part. But it's also an opportunity. Right. And your best guide is to think about when you talk to your friends or your family who aren't in your field and they ask, what do you do? What are you working on? That's the voice that you want to use when you're writing, because you're speaking to people you care about, people who are smart, but who don't know what you know. So you don't want to alienate anybody by using language they don't understand. You do want to include them and bring them in and compel them. So the kinds of things they ask you are probably the kinds of things you should be thinking of answering in the body of your work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have another question. Do you know who is the audience? Like, who is the target readers?
Who are the target readers?
Yes. Because it depends who is the audience, who is the target.
Yes.
I can describe the same story in different angles, right?
Yes. Now, in this case, if you're talking about writing for a general interest publication, then everyone is the audience. Really, every person who can read is your possible audience. You want to make sure that the tone of your piece, the language that you use, isn't going to alienate people because they don't understand it. So you want to use plain language where you can, but at the same time, You want to retain your authority and substance. Make sure that you're not making a cartoon out of what you're writing, but that you are making it easy enough for people to understand and interesting enough to command their attention. And that is a balance. So that, in other words, a person who knows everything about your subject, even more than you do, would come away from reading that and saying, good job. But a person who knew nothing about it and may not even have cared about your topic before, go, I just learned a lot. And to keep both of those people, those sets of people at the ends of the spectrum, engaged in reading your piece, that's the magic.
Yes. And the other thing is, it also depends on different target audience. You can choose different topics, right?
Yes. Now, again, that we're talking about in all the publications that we're talking about
Yeah.
targeting, they're not subject specific. So
Okay.
say if we were writing for a journal, or we were writing for a magazine that's only about birds or only about mechanics or something like that, we could probably be more specialized, and we could probably pick smaller topics and talk about them, knowing that the reader is likely going to know more of the basic concepts already and not have to worry about explaining stuff to them. But in this case, we're talking about the broad general.
Okay.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Can you do it?
Yeah, because when I think about myself, I seldom read any news or newspaper or
Right.
so.
You should try.
Definitely, I should try. But yeah, I still worry about who will read it. Like if it's for older people,
Yeah.
then I will write in what they're interested in, like their interesting topics.
Yeah.
Right? I can describe my story using their way, like their
Yeah.
interested way. So for younger kids or adults, or
Yeah.
it's will be different.
Well, the funny thing is, you can write about kids in a way that kids will like reading, that their parents will like reading, their grandparents will like, because everybody knows a kid. So it doesn't have to only be about, like, the subject and the reader don't have to be the
That's a good
same
idea.
person. They don't have, but everyone should be able to relate to the subject
Mhm.
that you're writing about.
Exactly.
Shyness is
Right.
so relatable.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so good idea. Yeah.
Lots of potential.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe I want to first follow up Abby's comments and his thoughts on the issue, and I will ask like a similar question from my own angle.
Yeah.
So firstly, as a question, I feel like a very like a similar feel. I got very similar feeling, and like sometimes I got anger about that issue. I'm from engineers, totally different subject, and if you talk about a historian, I talk about in my area, engineer area, we have a strong concern, at least from my side, like people just want to make publication for not because they want to share, but more because they need the publication, need numbers. It's resulting that more and more W paper appear in the literature. Sometimes it's not totally about jealous, but more about it mislead people, mislead the direction of technique, and even confuse people. For example, when I was a master or even undergraduate students who are interested in this technique, they will be misled. It reminds me like about another thing about leadership. I want to relate it to leadership. Just imagine how many times everyone sitting here, like in your meetings, some other ways, how many times your conversation and your topic be misled by some people who is skillful, but may not share the same interest as you. So it will distract other people who just come sit there on foot. And it will also cause a big trouble for people who really want to do things and need support from the audience. They need to find their own knobs to crack the direction and turn the direction and attention back to the normal ways.
Mhm.
So I think these similar things will happen in literature. For sure, we need fact, as you mentioned, we need fact, but we need to find our own knob. But the thing I keep in mind that in each of the field, no matter it's engineer, science, or like a historian of humanity, there are always pillars, like fundamental works, which shaped
the read and shift the major focus, the fundamentals of the meaning of the research, something like. So I guess the thing I'm trying to follow is that I want to target the deep, target the value and fundamentals of each of my subject topic, in hoping that I can skip and ignore those distracting voice who just following in their own interest, not for the meaning of the research or the topic. Then my question, following this kind of image, we just talked about from Abby, from other people. I guess writing or publishing an article to reach to different audience and have all like to get some impact. I think like the origin, the motivation for this process is from, I guess, from interest. Like we want to share some story, we find something interesting, I find a new flower, so I want to describe to other people. I find evolution theory, people are from monkeys, I want to ask like tell other people about like the thing, like in my mind, my assumptions, something like, and to justify it. But facing the the modern world where publication become a kind of criteria for promotion if you want to stay in academic, or it will bring you benefits from different aspects just for like some artificial interest. How people like us want to make publication and submit our paper with a very simple like interest and facing that kind of competition from people with very skillful but with less like good like I would say good willing or something like that. Yeah, I hope like you can understand my question. I think this got very clearly.
Well, no, but I mean, you analyzed a lot of things there in your preamble, and it's fascinating to hear the way you think about things. That is, I think probably part and parcel with your field of engineering, which you mentioned you're in, which is an analytical field where you're looking at what are all the components, what is the problem, how do we solve the problem? You're used to breaking things down into their component parts and figuring out the way through. And it's amazing to hear you talk about, what are the different motivations that people may have and whether they're sincere, and they may succeed even though they're insincere when the best thing might not end up happening. That's probably not going to be the subject of what you're writing about in your op-ed piece, but the idea should be, I think, the simple answer is that all of us know something that most other people don't know, and that we would like other people to understand, and we think they would want to understand. And we have to find that one of those things, there are many of those things really for most of us, find one of them and do a good job once in explaining it to them and understand, have the feeling of what that's like, so that the next time we get to do it, we can do a better job. And so for today, really, I want everybody to find one thing. And I want to help all of you through one story that you're going to get published. I want you to know the absolute pleasure of having your byline on something and it being out there for the public to judge, to read, to love, to hate, to dispute, to ignore. It's kind of like going on stage and playing a guitar solo or something. You don't know how it's going to be received. You don't know how it's going to be, but it's thrilling. I'll tell you that. Like it is one of the attractions of doing public writing, is that it's fun. Like when your piece comes out, you go, let's hit that. And hey, mom, look at this, and send it along, or whoever it is.
Exciting that publishing a journal article, when you have tens of thousands of people that are going to read it, as opposed to 100 people that are going to read your article, and it'll open up opportunities for invitations for people for you to come give a talk.
I should have mentioned that, and I'm sorry. Thanks for reminding me, Joe. I meant to put a paragraph in about in this year's presentation. Is that more and more we're understanding the impact of writing. It's not just about getting your ideas out there, but actual measurable things that happen as a result. That you might get a phone call from somebody say, "Can you speak at I saw your piece on this. Can you come and speak at my conference?" Can I, in the conversation, remember I told you about how the field of journalism is struggling, and there are fewer people doing this work. They have less time to do their work, and so they have to be more efficient in what they do. And the Conversation Canada, where many of these pieces get published, is turning ever more into a mine for story ideas for other people.
Right.
So they read a story about animals that survive in extreme environments and think, I'd like to do a story about animals that survive in extreme environments. Who should I interview? And the person who wrote the piece is a good start. So it's a place where people are finding ever more story ideas that they can do their own versions of, or if they're already doing, if someone's doing a story about um, the efficiency of petroleum products, they might go to the Conversation and do a search and see who has already written about it, and then that day or months later, phone that person and say, "Hey, I saw your story on this. Can I quote from that story, or can I ask you some more questions about it?" And so other outcomes flow from being published that can have very, very positive impact. I'll give you an example that's not from an op-ed, but just from regular journalism. There's a researcher here on campus who wasn't so hot on spending time with people like me to explain their research and write news releases and try to get stuff out there into the world. Until, I mean, he was friendly and polite. I don't want to make it sound like a bad person, but just like, well, okay, I'll do this, but I guess I have to do this. Until he got a call from Bayer, the people who make aspirin. And they said, I read about this in the news, and I'd really like to work with you. How can we set up a contract? And now that guy is an evangelist for media relations.
Yeah, you're used to just doing all your work, and you're not going to get paid for anything, all the other things that you do, but things like that can emerge where you're invited to talks, and large organizations give honorariums to invite you to come speak for an hour, to meet with our group, tell us about your expertise, right? So those are just other industry type opportunities that emerge from becoming someone who's known as a subject matter expert.
Now, are there any other general? I think you've been putting up your hand a couple of times. I'm sorry, it's taking me so long to get.
No, it's okay. The thing is that, for example, for me, it's difficult to select subject that at the same time is something that I work on it, and it's interesting for other people.
Yeah.
I work on theoretical, computational, quantum kind of things.
Yes, yeah.
More or less like that. So you see, if you want some people to relate to that, you can say, okay, let's talk about quantum tunneling effect and how it affects computers, that you won't be able to put more microprocessors, more diodes in a microprocessors in the future, so the computer power will get stalled if we continue the same progress that we're doing.
Yeah.
So you need to change how they will get constructed, or the things that I work is like, for example, predicting how two substances react, or will they react, will they give a product, what is what are the best conditions. So it's predicting that. You can do that in a laboratory, doing a lot of experiments. So will they react? Makes them, okay, how they react. More temperature, less temperature, with light, without light, so on. And then you spend thousands of dollars. Well, you can do that in a computer and get an approximation for how are the best conditions and what you should expect the reaction to give you as a product. So this has an interest on pharmaceutical companies, for example, but for the general public.
Yeah, but here's the thing I would say to you, is that that's you talking about your subject, looking at it this close up, right? You're immersed in it, and you're immersed in the details of the leading edge of that subject that is foreign to pretty well everyone else in this room.
So that's me trying to talk into the broad.
That's already, I know, you're already are.
I go inside I am making the pieces of the software that do that.
Yes.
So
you've already pulled back.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is, you pulled back from the microscope level to the eyeball level. Now pull back to the telescope level, and
but that
No, and
that's
here,
not
I
my
think you-
research anymore. It's,
well, but you know about it. And here's the thing is that
Different.
why do we, like, there's lots of questions that you probably drive right past and don't even think about that I would want to know if I met someone like you, if I was sitting with you on a plane. I would say, well, what is quantum computing? Where is it going? Why is it necessary? What the hell is it? I hear this term all the time.
quantum
Yeah, but you know, can you explain it to me? And
It's
Uh,
not my field of expertise, but it's basically you take a quantum system, a system that has quantum behavior, and use it as a bit because in quantum you have that the system is not in a state. For example, here you can say the pencil is here.
yes,
So in quantum, you can say the electron is here. You say the electron is more or less inside this
yes, yeah,
is area of area volume of space, and you can even say that it has these energies, like it has more or less an energy that's between these.
Yeah.
And if you measure one thing, the thing is that you affect the system. So you, if you measure something, then the other measurement and other things that you are doing is not on the same state that you did.
Yeah.
So basically, you treat the states as if the electron is in a mixture of states. It's like the pencil is here, it's here, it's here.
Yeah.
So quantum computing is using that, but for computing, it's like in a computer you have a bit. Everyone knows what is a bit. It can be 1 or 0. Then here it can be 1, 0, something more, something more, something more, and then you are doing the calculation of the all
yeah,
things at the same time, and then you just measuring what you want to get. You get all of the answers of the different calculations.
Yeah.
And you just the one calculation is more or less like that. Quantum computing aspect. Here's me, he kills me, but it's how can I explain that?
Well, you just did for one thing. You know what? I think all of us, did you notice how everyone was really paying close attention to what you were saying?
Yeah.
Because you were saying it passionately, you were saying it clearly. You were using examples when you laid the pen on the table. We could relate to. It tells me that you could write that piece if you wanted to. And I think that it would have utility or something like it. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but something that's part of your work that is a mystery to other people, that they would do well to learn, that they would care about learning, is where your story might be. I think we have till 3 o'clock today, I think, right? So I think it's important for us to, it was in this last 45 minutes to start to get to some of the ideas. And as you listen around the table, think about how that applies to you. I would say give that advice to all of you. If you have, who has come to this session today with an idea they might want to try writing? Please go
Yeah.
ahead.
So my research is based on how microorganisms can communicate within their community and with every one of us and every component of the community. I use a case scenario of a very well-studied plant that communicates with everything around it and helps to save, it helps protect itself because it cannot move, it cannot talk, it cannot move. It doesn't have the armory, physical armory to protect itself, but it has metabolic armory. And that involves producing chemicals that can help it fight parasites and even some bugs that come to eat it. And how this plant is called Nicotiana tenuata, which is a tobacco plant. And what it does is whenever there's a predator that wants to like start feeding on its leaves, because plants need their leaves to be able to produce food, it begins to make compounds, chemicals that attract the birds that would feed on those predators. Whenever I talk about this, I find that people are really fascinated. Like, do we really communicate with everything around us in such a manner? The answer is yes. We do communicate with even the bugs on our skin, but we don't understand the language. We don't even know the impact of our activities on the nature of the bugs that we have and how these bugs protect us and how we impact on the fact that it may no longer be able to protect us.
Yeah.
So these are some of the ideas I have, and I want to communicate to the public about this.
Yeah.
That's what I want to talk about.
Fantastic. I can already tell that you're a good, very strong communicator, that you care about your subject, that you can explain it in a way that someone like me, who's not in your field, can understand it and care about it. And as you were talking, I'm like, tell me more. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I want to know more. I was also thinking about how you might open a story.
So
Like,
I have topics that I think I might start with, and I want to say, first of all, my topic I would want to say in a way that it might draw attention is speaking the right language to your bugs could impact your health. Everyone is interested in their health, and they don't even know why they have to speak to a bug.
yeah,
That's for me, this,
I think that's something that is maybe the message you want to deliver.
yes,
But the way you might want to consider opening your story, and we talked about that lead, how do you get people to go, I gotta read this, I need to know more, where is she going with this?
okay.
You talk about, I think you say that the plant you're studying is the tobacco plant.
That's a plant I have studied. And
Right.
that the skills that I have got there, I'm using to
Yeah.
provide information.
But it doesn't, again, you don't have to write about, like, forget about necessarily writing about the very thing you're studying right now.
Yes.
It might be that, it might not be what you end up doing your op-ed about. It's just something that you know because of your work,
Mhm.
is all what you really need to think about. So the tobacco plant is vilified, as problematic, as the source of cancer, emphysema, all kinds of problems. But there's a lot to admire about there might even something like that could be your opening paragraph, like, I love tobacco. I don't smoke, I don't chew, I don't whatever, and neither should you. However, we all have something to learn from the tobacco plant. And then you can go from there into the same is true for our own bodies. This tobacco plant, it's easier to find and understand these languages, the way that it's communicating with the enemies of its enemy to survive.
Yeah.
We're doing the same thing, and that's a huge area of research and study where there's a lot to learn and discover, and we can expect that we're going to find when we get there similar answers that will benefit humanity. So that's almost your whole piece right there. With some.
I like the title. The enemy of my enemy is my
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Who has another idea they want to, so let's just bat around ideas like this. Who else has one they
Derek,
want to raise?
Yeah, so, uh. The sense of wonder that people experience when they understand what basic biology research does is an enormous value in and of itself. So that's kind of the basic idea. You want more?
But yeah. So far, I'm puzzled a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. It's starting with that same conversation we had earlier.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to defund basic biology and basic research, especially.com. And so, well, what's an argument you can make? You can make arguments about human health. You can make arguments about economic benefit. But what about the sense of wonder people experience when they experience that joy of discovery? And basic biological research provides a means for people to experience that sense of wonder and discovery.
Mhm. I worry that you're almost starting in the weeds, in the sense that you're on the defensive already about basic biological research, presuming that there are others who are on the offensive against basic biological research, when probably most people aren't thinking much about biological research at all, be it basic or applied. Right? But there is a good story in what you're saying. I think it's the value of wonder, as opposed to, hey, there is value here, I know you don't think so, but there is. But if the approach is, let me take you into this world of wonder. And remember at the beginning when you rehearsed your 90-second presentation, and we said maybe some examples would be helpful. And then did you notice everybody light up when you said, think about the seal that is underwater for 2 hours at a time, hunting 600 meters or however many 100 meters below the surface. Think about the mouse that's living with almost no oxygen, but managing to raise a family high up in the mountains. Those things are amazing. And everyone was listening. And so you had us, and then you should be grabbing us like that, and then doing something with that attention. And then you can say, this matters because it's that all biological research begins with a sense of wonder that we have as children, And some of us retain, and we're able to explore and exploit that wonder and then do stuff with it that has value. Explain the value as opposed to defending the value. To say, then I think you got a really neat story.
Yeah, this is interesting. So what's the relationship between like the thread, like the point of
Yeah.
the story,
Yeah,
and the hook? Because I feel like what you're asking for is like some combination of a hook
yeah,
and the actual like the point.
yeah. So it's the needle and the thread, like I mentioned before, that the needle has to get you there.
Yeah.
Right? It gets the thread into the fabric. But the thread is what you leave behind. And so it doesn't have to even, might only be one sentence in your whole piece that lays out that exact thing, or it might not even be there at all. It might be by implication, the lesson that you're trying to teach, or the meaning that you're trying to leave behind in the reader's mind. But don't worry about that. Like, you don't have to really labor that very much. A big part of what I have to do when I'm writing pieces for like admin people here is they always want to be about how great McMaster is. And they have all these paragraphs in about, McMaster is Canada's nuclear university. We've already got a reactor. We need a new reactor. We have one like that this week. And I was crossing out stuff for the important people were writing, saying it's never going to get past an editor because it seems promotional. And just by writing this piece, by having McMaster leaders and nuclear experts write a piece about nuclear reactors, you can only leave the impression that this is a great nuclear university. So you don't have to say that. And so for you don't have to necessarily worry that I'm not going to spend very many, I'm not going to spend 4 paragraphs talking about the value of basic biological research. The importance of basic biological research will be apparent from the way that you've told your story. And you'll deposit, that's the deposit you'll leave behind in the person's mind. That add up?
I'll be thinking about it.
Okay.
I think it's logical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just trying to think of an alternative, like kind of needle thread. There's so many, I'm sure there's so many research projects that seemed esoteric at the time, but led to something applied like within biology as well. So that be a lead?
Yeah,
Here's something that was
For
just funded for the sake of discovery.
So let's say,
No one even knew what was going to apply from it, but look, from this we got an antibiotic. Or
you can start with some of those fascinating examples from your own research that you told us, and without telling the reader you're doing it, and say, studying birds' beaks. Well, guess who did that? And guess what came from that? Our understanding of evolution, because somebody was fascinated by why do these similar looking birds have different beaks? Oh, they must be adapted. How did they ever get there? Then suddenly we've got Darwin, right? So the fascination, the wonder, and then the discipline that is applied to that wonder creates lasting value. Is a nice way.
We have somebody online who has a question as well.
Yes, oh yeah, that's good.
Benjamin.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Speaking as a disembodied voice, thanks, Wade, for doing this. This has been very eye-opening for me. My background is in humanities, and my current research is in the McPherson Institute here, doing research on generative AI and teaching and learning. So I'm working on a project that deals with student assessments, essentially, and redesigning assessments to account for generative AI and to resist it or incorporate it. So in terms of timeliness, I don't really have a problem. This is a extremely timely and very popular. In fact, I think I have the opposite problem of there's so much saturation. I'm trying to sort of figure out where I can, make my voice heard in a way that's not just sort of parroting what's already out there, because every day there's dozens, if not hundreds of articles being published. So one of the areas it's kind of adjacent to my research is labor issues and generative AI and sort of the human labor that's behind these AI platforms that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about. And there was a recent article that kind of got me interested in this, that in Finland, there's a company that's now using prison labor to tag and train AI systems. And it's primarily because they're trying to build systems in Finnish, and the typical sort of direction of labor is north to south. So usually these companies will use labor in the global south because it's cheaper, and there's people that they can get who speak English. There's not as many people who speak English in the global, or sorry, that speak Finnish in the global south. So now they're turning to prison labor. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of turn this into a story to, I mean, basically say there's a serious problem with human labor and AI that is not really being considered. And it's adjacent to my research because this is not the primary research I'm doing. I'm looking at how we can integrate this and what impact it's going to have on teaching and learning. But at the same time, I'm constantly having these conversations about ethics and bringing this technology into the university without really thinking about these problems, which is, I think, what some schools are doing. So, the lead for me, or sort of the pitch, is that, we're looking at these screens, we're asking this robot, this technology, a question, and yet there's sort of a human cost, a really major human cost behind it that I think needs to be taken into consideration. And it's very hard for people to wrap their heads around that, I think. So I don't know if that making sense there, if I'm.
I think you've identified a lot of things without my even having to make reference to them. You thought about the fact that this is a timely subject. It's a much explored subject. There's lots of people talking about AI. Sadly, many of them don't know what they're talking about. They're not really adding to the conversation. They're actually creating confusion, I think. Yeah. So how do you find something to say that's novel and substantial and interesting? You had me at prisoners. Like, that is just goddamn interesting. Like any editor would, their eyebrows would rise on hearing that. I think that we think that AI is remote and we think of the consequences of using AI, of being like eliminating jobs or creating misunderstanding or the end of thinking, but we don't really think about the fact that people are being hurt right now by AI, or even that our future might be being shaped in a prison workshop. Which is a very, very, that kind of novelty is what makes something newsworthy. The thing that you didn't expect is what news is. And I never would have expected that.
Yeah.
And so
it was hard to wrap my head around it upon reading this art. This is only like a couple weeks, maybe even last week it was published, and I think it was in Wired. And this company is, there's kind of discussion of scaling this to other countries that could potentially, quote unquote, benefit from it, because, they're trying to build language models in a language that is really not spoken much outside of that country. And for Finland, it's also, there's people that speak Finnish in Finland, but you have to pay them $25 an hour. Like, they have good, minimum wage. So where do you go instead? And so there's an interview, but I see how that could be the hook, and then it's sort of threading that into the research itself that I need to work on.
It's going to be all about prisoners and AI, but that's just, again, the door in that makes me say, I want to walk in that door. I want to know what that story says. Cool. Right? That's the needle, and the thread is that there are other ways that the creation of artificial intelligence is exploiting the people, that is perhaps harmful in ways that we might not have considered in our zeal to just get on board and start having computers write stuff for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Good one. Yes.
Okay, so I've had some problems choosing my topic. I still haven't really settled on one, because I'm from humanities. My postdoc is about research that is completely different than my own. Then I have leadership, and then my natural philosophies. So I'm kind of stressed out about it. So anyhow, I guess what I want to do, what I'm thinking is, talk about what nature can teach us about leadership. Now, this has been done recently. This has been a really huge trendy thing. HBR is the first hit that will come up, and it's like stuff that is really, I mean, I question the logistical like directionality because they're suggesting almost like, oh, these things are inherent in nature. I'm like, no, like we understand them in nature because we're using our linguistic framework to say that's what's going on. So I want to do it in a different way. And then to talk about leadership from like a network leadership perspective, because when I was doing my 90-second pitch, the network leadership is what I didn't talk about. That is the high level, or not the high level, but the that is like the core concept there that maybe I don't get into as much in the pitch. But I don't know, is that even interesting at all?
You know what, I'm thinking right now? There's a guy, so I told you how hard it is to get in the Globe and Mail, right? 1 in 50. So we look for softer ways, easier ways to get into the Globe and Mail. They have they're known as a business newspaper, and the report on business is like a newspaper within the newspaper, Globe and Mail. And it has its own opinion section and its own opinion editor. That guy is really open-minded. He loves McMaster authors. And we've been able to take some pieces are obvious, like we had a business professor do a piece about Elon Musk and his style of leadership. That was direct. But we've had other people from different faculties write about things that were applicable to business from another point of view, and been able to get in the Globe and Mail while others were standing on the outside wishing they were. And so when you talk about leadership in nature, I wonder, and then you can just reject this openly if you like. I wonder if there are ways that you can compare how leadership occurs in nature that we also see in business. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I can do that, and it's kind of been done, but again, it's like, no, interconnectivity doesn't exist inherently as a system
Yeah.
in nature. That is our logic that we're mapping out
Yes,
to nature. And that's what is just pissing me off.
You're saying the way we're perceiving nature in our very narrow human way, and we're extracting from it what we can understand and use. When really its own forms of leadership are probably more profound and more objective. They're different because their goals of leadership in nature are different than goals of leadership in society.
Well, I mean, and that's where I would say differs, that in business, they're looking at this is like they're looking at it from a not a self-interested perspective, but it's for profit, right? Profit is the end goal. Whereas the way that I would look at it is a human impact, kind of what I was talking about in my 90-second pitch. And I don't know, I feel a bit torn about it. It won't go on forever, but it's just like, I guess at the end of the day, when we look at nature, we can probably always see what we want to see in nature.
I think that's exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because like we're looking for it.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
So is it, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Are you critiquing some business practices because people are trying to confirm it with, look, animals do this. No wonder we no wonder we do it. But then you could draw and just say that this is a false comparison. It doesn't hold up. It's like confirmation bias. Like we're just seeing what we want to see because we're putting our own lens on it to justify something that's not being done properly in this context.
Could we learn more by looking at the telescope from the other end and saying, in nature, what are we seeing? And, if in business this goal is profit and sales, and in nature it's survival, right?
Sustainability, but also like
Yep.
cooperation, like
Mhm.
because that's an inherent part of being able to sustain yourself as a system.
I think for you, one thing you're going to have to do, because I've heard you speak 2 or 3 times today, and every time you start talking, everyone is really interested in what you're saying, and we're completely behind you because it's so. I don't even know you, but I know that what you're saying is really interesting, and you're very passionate about it, and you're very intelligent. So stop apologizing when you start to say something, because you've said every time we've talked, so this probably isn't any good. This is probably stupid, and it never has been. So you can save yourself some time by saying, just think about when you're talking about your work in leadership in nature, what is it that your people outside of your field, your friends and your family, what are they focusing on? What are they asking most about? And where do you feel like the proudest of explaining? Your subject is going to be in there someplace. it will be through the kind of lens that Joe's talking about. For you, it's, and ultimately, I think you've got the happy problem of having many things you could probably write about, and you're gonna have to pick one. And then
Yeah.
kind of shave it down. But for you, I think the best place for you to start might be in the middle when you're writing your story. You don't have to start writing a story. You'll be talking about all the time people spend on their leap. Sure, they do. You don't have to start by writing the first paragraph. You can start by writing it in the middle and going, you might, barf out 2,000 words and say, what are the best 750 in here? That's one way of doing it. I sometimes do that.
That's exactly right.
Right.
So you could never get it right the first time. I don't try, so.
And then, or even take those 2,000 words and hand them to somebody and say, what do you, read this and tell me what you think. If it's somebody you trust, they might say, wow. And you go, well, okay, that's going to be how I'm going to open this. And then it's going to flow from there. And I'm going to eliminate this, this, and this. Like, so much of it is elimination,
Yeah,
right? And almost all of writing is revision.
okay,
Most people think writing is just putting the words down, but it's mostly getting rid of the words that you don't need.
yeah, definitely. Thank you. That was helpful, and I will try to stop apologizing.
Don't apologize for apologizing now.
I just had an idea too. So like say there was a celebrated like business person, I don't know what they're called, when they buy companies and then they break them up and they sell them off in little pieces. And then they make profit from that. But it kind of destroys it. Otherwise, maybe potentially good company. And then that person could draw an analogy, well, I'm the apex predator and I could just eat whatever I want. But in an actual ecosystem, it's not like an apex predator just gorges nonstop and like eliminates
Yeah,
everything.
I
Like,
think so, yeah.
so that would be like kind of picking and choosing, just saying, well, this justifies what I'm doing. Like I'm just like the lion that can just eat
Yeah.
what I want. But
That's fantastic, 'cause it's cherry picking.
yeah,
It's such
exactly. So I'm
bad
kind of seeing
situations.
like connections there that
Yeah.
could make like a really interesting story.
Okay, I am really good at criticizing things, so I'll stick with
Do you remember the CBC radio program called Ideas?
Yeah.
Nala Ayed is the host of it. She used to be a fantastic international correspondent for CBC. And many, many great journalists have been the host of this program. It's an hour-long show. It's on in the evening. And it's just one idea. And it's usually one or two people talking about that idea in a big, big picture context. Like it does have a rarefied audience. You have to be pretty smart to want to listen to it, I think. But boy, sure, but it is still at a level that everyone can understand. And the kind of idea that you're talking about, nature and humanity, is like will make you a good person to be on that show one day.
Yeah.
That the journey to being on that show and doing that starts with something like this, though.
Okay.
This is like I said, this is the I all want you to do. I want you all to try to get one piece published and just see where that takes you.
Okay.
And it'll take you outside the comfort zone of your own subject and your own world in which you operate. And I know you're skeptical. How can I possibly do this? You will, and you might write one of the best pieces in this whole room.
That's true.
I'm not scared of it.
That show.
I don't want any of you to be scared of it at all. I want this to be fun and enjoyable. I do want it to be difficult and challenging. I want you to rise to that challenge and find your subject. Who else has a subject they'd like to put on the table?
So, my research looks at, how basically ancient reading practices, I'm in the religious studies department here. And I look at how ancient Christians and Muslims, read the Bible, read the Quran. I look at ancient manuscripts, ancient codices, that type of stuff. So in this op-ed, I want to juxtapose ancient reading practices, especially the reading of scripture in antiquity. And I want to juxtapose that with some modern reading practices as well, such as the hysteria over critical race theory, the reading of racialized literature, Trump's Bible that he held up in front of Lafayette Church.
Yeah.
And I want to contextualize this modern hysteria around how books are used with how ancient people imagined books being used. And I kind of need, I don't really have like a thesis yet about what I want to say about this juxtaposition that I'm making. But that's kind of where I'm at right now. Yeah,
Well, again, like, you're taking a hell of a lot of information and possibilities,
yeah,
and you're gonna be able to, it's not to stick your hand in and pull out a handful of them
Yeah.
to use. I think starting with the idea of how we read today and how we control reading. You know, you're talking about racialized literature being banned,
yeah,
taken away from people, presuming they can't possibly understand or contextualize
yeah,
things that, and they're trying to control the way we think.
yeah,
By doing that, it causes, by eliminating certain possibilities, guiding us toward the kind of thinking they want to do. And you can compare that to how people read before.
yeah.
They weren't necessarily trying to get people to read to adopt a set of ideas and thinking, and to the exclusion of all others.
Yeah, well,
For
sometimes they
example.
were.
Okay, or sometimes they
Yeah,
were, so
sometimes they were. So I
if they
think
were, say
this
this is nothing new,
Yeah,
then you can say this, it's nothing new.
it's nothing new.
Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, what do I want to say that's nothing new? But for me, that's not enough. I
but we didn't
wanna-
learn this lesson before, we should have learned this lesson before,
Yeah,
and we're in danger of repeating
yeah,
the negative outcomes that came from reading the way that we used to.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'm still kind of playing around with
Yeah.
with what I want.
Like, in the end, the lesson can be really obvious like that.
Yeah,
That it's really through multiple ideas, points of view, kinds of stories that we can become full people. And we could have been much more earlier in human history, except, you know, and you can talk about I mean, still people were reading and they were developing a skill that
Yeah.
that now allows us to have a multiplicity of kinds of reading to do. That was the only reading available, that's what people read. There's
yeah,
many ideas there. But I think if you start with something that we can relate to today, you avoid words like juxtapose in your text. Even that's a $10 word. Everyone in here knows what that is, but that's the kind of word that makes an editor go, "Oh, another academic."
yeah,
But if you talk about just, you know, when you read up a little bit in the news on you know, To Kill a Mockingbird's being banned here,
Yeah.
this is being banned there, this is frightening, but it's not new. Here's the lesson we should have learned, and then explain what happened in history with people reading religious texts and limiting their thinking to narrow channels that produced these positive outcomes and mainly these negative outcomes, and we have to be really careful.
yeah, yeah. That's
And that's then 755.
okay.
And wait, this might be one of those situations where there's sometimes an emerging opportunity for timeliness.
Yes.
Like, so imagine, like, you cited some really provocative examples, but suddenly in the news, if there's some event, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that ties in with this, you know,
Cancel culture would be a hot.
yeah, like something will happen for sure.
Yeah.
You
Someone
can
will do
easily
something.
tie that in as like lead.
yeah. I'm gonna be watching carefully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we'll write this
Yeah.
up anyway, and then if
Yeah.
something emerges, you can always kind of like
Yeah.
adjust it, like.
Yeah.
fit
Or
that
even
in.
while you're writing it, it might, like, there's a term for that, we call it newsjacking in my business now, where we know we've got an expert on something, and we go, she can talk about this today. Because, you know, or we might have an op-ed that's on a general subject. And an evergreen piece like we were talking about before, that can easily be set aside and sometimes forgotten about. If we put a top on it or a lead on it that's about something happening today, then we can make it seem necessary to get this out there today, even though we've only adapted it. So I think there's many possibilities.
Speaking of timeliness, you know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Kazumi, but Halloween is coming up,
Oh, nice.
and Kazumi does research on bats, which are often misunderstood.
We were just talking about this in our news meeting yesterday. What kind of bad pieces can we do?
They're totally
Do you
misunderstood.
work with Paul Fowler?
Yeah,
Yeah.
There might be an opportunity for like a timely Halloween.
yeah,
Alright.
because I was wondering what the timeliness of my study. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right.
What are you just talking a little bit about your work?
So I study echolocation and hearing in bats.
So in the summer, if you look up in the sky at dusk, you might spot bats flying. Yeah. Like quietly. But actually they produce ultrasound vocalization, which is inaudible to us, and listen for faint echoes reflecting off tiny insects. Yeah. To locate and catch the prey. Yeah. And if you have a special device that converts ultrasounds into audible sound, you will know how frequently and loudly they produce ultrasound echolocation levels. And especially even when they fly in a group, the acoustic situation will become much complex. And I'm interested in how they focus on their echo of interest, which is, for example, a returning echo from an insect prey in the presence of a lot of sounds that are very similar to their own. And yeah, and researchers, including myself, have found that echolocating bands alter the spectral and temporal characteristics of their vocalization, possibly to avoid confusion between your own echoes and sounds from conspecific bands. Right. And yeah, that's basically what I've been studying. And
So, what's interesting is I think that many of us are aware of, in a very broad sense, that bats are using vocalizations to judge distance and to find things that they can't see and that we can't see. That's sort of generally known, but the idea of how much is going on inside the brain of the bat, like what is it? What's everything it has to do? Like, all it wants to do is eat 200 mosquitoes in the next 2 hours, and that's its goal. That's how it's going to live. How can it possibly do that? It has to work very hard to do that because it's flying through. It's not just running across the ground or swimming in the water. It's flying through all of the air at night, finding things that we can't see that it can find. And that's its advantage, right? Is that it can find prey, and when the birds are already perching on in the trees for the night, that's when their work begins. Yeah. So how do they go about doing that and explaining that in terms of the adaptation? Like even they think that's hard, it's even harder than that because other bats are flying around. They're also letting their inaudible squeaks out and bouncing back, and they have to think like, is that Steve over there squeaking or Sally? How do I want to hear my echoes off my mosquitoes? How do I do that? And they have to adapt to make that happen. I think if you just get a little bit farther into it like that and explain it though in a way that we can all relate to, that is, and it would go well.
How about like the benefits of bats? Because I think a lot of general public would also have a negative perception.
Yep.
Like, so eating the mosquitoes, I guess that's kind of good, isn't it?
yeah, it's kind of, yeah, they serve as
It's a key part of the ecosystem, I guess, right?
pest control.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
it can
mean,
be
those are
simple
things
as
that
that, yeah.
people don't know. Right?
Yeah, we should, instead of saying bats should be, we often say, people think of bat, yeah, it could be as simple as that. If we're gonna go for a Halloween one, which we need to do probably in the next week. Because people will be looking for the Halloween content ahead of time. That is one of those times when something can be planned. But I know, like when Paul has appeared on the television shows, he's been like a bunch of saw. He's really good at what he does, and in both as a scientist and as an explainer of his research. And I know he'd support you in doing this. If we talk about bats, this is the time of year you could start with. This is the time of year when we think of symbols of things that frighten us because it's Halloween: skeletons, gravestones, witches, and bats. But really, bats are in the wrong category. Bats are something we should be thinking about, like for our birthday, or for Christmas, or whatever, because bats are great. I love bats. I'm studying them, but the reason you should love bats is this. And the bats are threatened right now. You might not see as many bats as you used to, and you can talk a little about white nose syndrome and how we need to resolve that, but why we should want and welcome bats. That they're not frightening, they're certainly not dangerous, and if they didn't exist, what our world would look like.
I think, yeah, I think as Wade said, you should get on this. Like this could be, you could be like our lead off
Application.
publication.
We can get a pitch into the conversation soon about that. They will want, this is getting to the mechanics of how you do stuff with them. What they like, the way that they operate is you don't send them a whole piece and they accept or reject it. You send them a pitch, which is, you fill out a form that includes 2 key paragraphs. One is a 50-word summary of your story, and the other is a 100-word explanation of why it's significant. And if we get that, and if they say, yeah, we like that, go ahead and write that piece, then you know they're gonna publish it when it's done. Usually I get people to write the whole piece first anyway, because if they don't like it, then we can find another place for it, it's already done. But in this case, I think we should do it in the natural order that when they ask for it. So if you can reach out to me in the next couple of days, I can help you with that. If you wanna do it, you don't have to, just because we're all talking about it, you don't have to do this. But it would be a good way of getting this done. It would probably inspire a lot of people in this room to do their own.
I definitely want to try it.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
Remind me of your name? Kazuma, okay, so when just send me, these guys have my email address, send me a note, and we'll get started on it. I could probably start with you on Friday.
So
Amazing.
another thing that I found interesting on that is that, for example, everyone that has a hearing is doing constantly what is called Fourier transform on their brain subconsciously, because you can separate the frequency. You can, in an orchestra, you can know the sound of the violin from the sound of the piano, for example, and everyone is mixed together. That is done by a Fourier transform in your brain. And the thing is that the bats are doing that, listening of what he was doing is the bats are doing that and are doing that in a really short time frame, because they need to calculate also the distance from the insect and do even a triangulation of the exact position of the insect in a matter of instantaneously. It's like their vision. So it's like they have a computer running.
Yeah, and I think if you explain like why that's so amazing, make that really clear. That, that how many times a second are they making these sounds? What judgments are they making? What are they eliminating? And what do they have to get out of it?
Yeah.
No, they have to get enough bugs, if that's what they're eating, depending on the type of bat. Bats around here, that's what they eat. They need to get enough to live on. That's a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
And then
I
kind of
think
help
that's
out your local bat. Buy
Yeah.
bat box, do it,
Yeah.
this, do that.
Katie, maybe you could just remind everyone of upcoming due dates.
Yes, so I will say goodbye to our online folks. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. All right,